Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Two Old Sexperts talking sexuality and disabilities. Today's episode is on masturbation. I am one of your hosts, Sean McGill, joined by my co-host, Sharon Potter. So I think today is probably one of the most difficult subjects to talk about. I was thinking about it this morning before, getting on with you, and just the word masturbation alone, I feel in the work that I've done with people, that's even a harder word for people to say than sex. And
Absolutely.
because it has such a private connotation to it, but there's also so much stigma attached to it whenever you're thinking about the morals, values, beliefs, religion that we grew up with. And we don't want to step on any of that either. I want people to stay rooted in their beliefs. And we're not here to negate those things, but we're here to try to amplify concerns as it relates to not addressing things like masturbation and the trouble that people can have or the harm that they can do to themselves if we're not talking about it.
And I know that you and I have both seen the trouble and the dangerous health issues that can come about when we're not dealing with this issue. It's important, but it is a difficult one. And I think for the people that we support, many of them, probably most of them, are not going to have a life partner. And they're adults with adult bodies and adult feelings, which include sexuality. And what are they to do? And they're alone. And one of the things that I refer to masturbation as is loving yourself. Mm-hmm. and talking in more detail about it. But I think it's important to know that may be the only means of comfort and pleasure that some of the people we support have, and we need to be supportive of that and careful in how we deal with it, and the support that we give to staff, the direct support professionals who are dealing with this every day, and how we can support them as well.
It can become a very complex issue, and no situation is the same. One of the things that I often bring to the table when I'm doing teaching or training with individuals and their staff or their family members is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I joke with people, all the money that I'm still spending on paying off my education, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the one thing that I have consistently used since, being out of graduate school now, 22 years, because it makes the most sense. In talking, it's a pyramid, as we know, and the meeting our basic human needs. We have to meet our basic human needs first before advancing in more critical skills like maintaining jobs and maintaining relationships and spontaneity. But sexuality is a basic human need. We all have sexual thoughts. We all have sexual feelings. And I think that's sort of a bridge to helping people recognize that it's not so obscure to begin with.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I find interesting, and we can talk about that in a little bit further in the program, but is children and the messages that we give to children. And when we think of masturbation, many people do not think about children, and it's not so much sexual as sensual. But baby boys get erections in utero, and babies getting their diapers changed get erections. And very young females lubricate vaginally, and your kids will hump their teddy bears and things like that. How families and adults respond to that stays with those individuals until they're adults, and the messages that they get, they're carrying with them. And it's pretty simple. I think it's one of those things that I think is simple, and it's actually very complicated. It's that it's normal and it's healthy. It's private.
It's private.
And that's it. Yeah. And a lot of young kids do, they're self-pleasuring. They're not going to have an orgasm because developmentally that's not where they are. Their bodies. And then when they get to be 5 or 6 and they become aware of, you don't pick your nose in public, or you don't do that. And that's one of the things that is private. So you don't usually see it in kids that are like 8, 9, 10, unless there's some issue going on with them. And then it can certainly be a sign that there's a problem.
It's interesting that you brought up just the different things that we do that we consider private. I created a worksheet many years ago, and I use this a lot too. I just list a bunch of things that we do as people, putting on chapstick, brushing your hair at a table, things we do or we don't do. And we talk through, is this something you would do in private or is this something you would do in public? And we talk through those situations, because even just saying brushing your hair while you're at a table, well, socially, that's not something you would want to do because it would be considered kind of gross or dirty or, something like that because of the food being there. And we have to talk through those situations. But you said picking your nose, that's clearly something all people do, right? But we do it in private because of the social implications of things. Masturbation is in private, not just because of the social implications, but because of the legal implications also.
And I guess, we should, I don't know if we need to define it, but I think we probably do. I mean, it's the self-stimulation of genitals, and both boys and girls do it, men and women. And it's private and healthy and private. It's interesting because the healthy part of it is that, it can reduce headaches. It can reduce pain. It's a healthy, normal sort of thing for people to do. And it can be done with a partner, of course, but usually we find, that it's being done alone. And when I'm working with adults with intellectual disabilities, one of the things that I say again is, it's loving yourself. And I talk about, touching your penis or your clitoris or your vagina, the sexual body parts, the genitalia, and what I call, you move toward a place where you get, and I will say an orgasm, but some people don't know that word. Mm-hmm. So I call it a big happy feeling all over. And then usually I get smiles from the group nodding their heads. Yes, I know that. I know that thing. And it's just important for them to understand that, and that it's okay. It's okay. But so for so many, it's not. And for so many of us, not just people, with intellectual disabilities, people in general, and you referred to different religious groups or cultural groups. And I've had a couple situations where I've worked with individuals that was the issue. My mother was a Christian, and I'm a Christian, and Christians don't do that. And this poor gentleman that I worked with he was masturbating almost to the point of ejaculation. He would stop and he would verbally say, I'm a Christian, I'm a Christian. And he was having terrible physical problems and a lot of pain. And I asked the staff if he had any family, and his mother had died, and he had a brother. This particular family was Mennonite. And I said, has anyone talked to the brother? And they said, no. I mean, nobody wanted to deal with the issue. They were so uncomfortable. So I did. And this very lovely man sat down with his brother and said, I'm a Christian too, and I do that. And, our mother was a good woman, but our mother is gone. Anyway, the problem got resolved. But here was this man in his 40s who was carrying this with him the whole time. And it was fairly easy to resolve. But if he didn't have a brother, or, someone didn't suggest that they have the brother talk to him or know where the brother felt, he could have felt like the mother did. But they're the things that we're now doing. Like, there's maybe not a brother that can talk to someone that we're supporting, but we can, and staff can, and we should be talking to them.
Yeah. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot about religion throughout the podcast that we do. I always reference my dear friend, Sister Grace. We talk a lot about not what's right or what's wrong in terms of who are you as a human being, and how do you treat other human beings too, as being the most critical thing that we need to focus on. But we've had to go to those uncomfortable places with families. I had a Catholic family, very Catholic family that I worked with, and their son, who was an adult, was showing a sexual interest in teenagers and young girls. And he wanted to masturbate. He had absolutely no sexual release whatsoever. And he kept gravitating towards looking at younger girls, which I could see a bigger problem was going to develop. And it took sitting down and meeting with the mother and having a very respectful yet uncomfortable conversation about, I don't want to step on your religious belief, but I'm concerned that he could become something even worse, labeled a pedophile, if we don't find ways to allow him to release the sexual energy and tension. And she said, putting it that way made far more sense. And
absolutely.
Not that she was comfortable with it, she was a little more accepting and understanding of it.
Well, it's true. I mean, it's, the discomfort, and I think I've mentioned this before, but when I do groups, usually when I do them direct support staff or therapists, what have, and put them into small groups and ask them what messages they received about sex as children. Within a minute, you have laughter. in the group because the messages, many of them were ridiculous. But when it comes to masturbation, they were absolutely not. Shame on you. That's bad. Don't ever do that. Like, don't ever say the word. And you're right. That word more difficult than saying sex. It's just shameful, and it's shameful that it's shameful.
Well,
But
and looking back in time, I mean, think about the messages over the course of history that people were institutionalized for masturbation.
yes, my goodness, yes, wow, that's amazing to even think about. Yeah.
So there was a pretty strong connotation for centuries when it comes to talking about masturbation. But we have to be very, very, very of what we say to people too. I've had people, and I use the term in the name of helping, who would say things like, don't touch it, meaning your penis, because it'll fall off. And I've had people who took that very literally. I had one gentleman who was stabbing pencils and stabbing forks into his penis whenever he was trying to urinate. His mother was also very fussy about making sure that there was no urine spray anywhere around the toilet. And think about it, trying to control the flow of urine while you're not touching your penis can be a challenge. So he knew he had to keep the bathroom clean, but he knew, I'm not supposed to touch it because it'll fall. That's crazy to think. And she was mortified when we had to talk about that then.
Well, it's so strange because I think I knew the same. Of course, it wasn't the same fellow, but I had a situation almost exactly the same thing. And he wouldn't touch his penis, and he would use a pencil or a spoon or whatever to get his penis out of his pants when he urinated, but he wouldn't touch it. The only time he touched his penis was when he had an involuntary erection, and then he would punch it and pound it. And I mean, it was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. And he was suffering, and the staff didn't know how to help him. And, we did eventually, but it was the same message that he got. Don't touch that. That's nasty. And he was a young man in his 20s. He was an adult with sexual drives, and it was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. I mean, I think he's very lucky that we got involved with it in a real way at that point, because, he could have gotten serious damage to his body.
Yeah. I mean, there's opportunity to even die from the damage that people do. And I know you and I have shared a lot of stories over the years about the physical damage. So I don't know how you handle things, but when I first get a referral, I want to know a little bit of information about what is happening. And when I hear things like someone is near mutilating their body, I think that is not a typical thing to do. I know there are some fetishes and that sort of thing, and I don't know that we're going to get deep into the fetishes in this talk, but I don't know of anyone who wakes up one day and says, I'd like to mutilate my genitalia, because that is such a wonderful thing. There are reasons behind it.
Well, it reminds me of another situation I was involved in, and I think we can spend a little time talking about what are referred to as sexual toys, which is even more uncomfortable, I think, for people. But I was asked to come and work with this particular gentleman. And again, yes, I did. I reviewed his record and talked to the staff, and then made an appointment, and I went and met with him. And he was very nice. He was very open. And one of the things I always tell is, you can tell me anything. I will not get upset. You can ask me or tell me anything. And of course, the exception, is that if they tell me that they're harming someone else or touching someone else without permission, without consent, rather, that would have to be reported. But this gentleman the problem was he'd been hospitalized twice for rectal bleeding. And the second time, it was really serious. He was in hospital for about a week, I guess, maybe six days, I think. And what he told me was that when he masturbates and he put object in his anus, he was stimulating the prostate. But he was using things like ballpoint pens and spoons and stick. Last time it was a stick, and it was horrible. I mean, it was really horrible. So he gave me permission to talk to his staff about what was going on and why he did this. And when I did, they were all male staff, fairly young, and they were looking horrified. And I said, now you all know that there are devices made for this purpose. And do you know that? And every one of them said yes. And I said, and is there an adult shop somewhere close by? And they said yes. And I said, why hasn't someone gone with him to purchase an item? And they simply said, we didn't think we could. And I said, well, we can, and we are going to. So which one of you guys wants to come with us to the store? And nobody really wanted to go, but one of them did. And, and he got a device. And, I told him, how do how to keep it clean and it's private, where to keep it in his drawer. And, I mean, it was resolved pretty easily, but he could have died, and
Yes.
I did,
Yes.
he literally could have died.
And I think we've had a number of those, and it's been almost parallel. You said, I think I had this person. I'm going, Sharon, I think I had this person. Because
Exactly.
these stories come up, and these are real people. So we have to be willing to go there. And I think I see you and I as sort of the bridge, where we're helping people who are unaware or uncomfortable with something sort of cross over with us to being in a far more helpful place that is a little more comfortable. And with the proper education and support, people can do this. I've worked with a lot of non-speaking people. The person I worked with who was inserting, he even tried to insert a knife into his rectum. He was non-speaking. But if we presume the intelligence of people, their intellect, and we talk with them and we work with them, they get it. And then they have safe, healthy, meaningful lives at that point too.
Yeah, and the video that you have using the anatomically correct dolls and the little clay plastic people that I have that are anatomically correct, they're kind of funny because I made them, but they're little people. I have 2 men and 2 women. And that really helps a lot. I mean, you can show them, they can show you, they can pick up the little things that I make, the little plastic creatures, and show you what they're talking about. And you just have to go that extra mile and break things down onto a very basic, simple level. I've never met anyone that I couldn't actually communicate with effort, just by breaking it down. And so many people say, oh, they won't understand. They just, we don't tell them because they won't understand, or we don't want them to know because then they might want to do it. Well, they're going to want to do it anyway, whatever the do it might be, because they're adults with adult bodies and they're sexual beings. So the more information we can get at whatever level, I think is absolutely, absolutely critical.
The more we try to circumvent or we try to deter people from exploring their bodies and masturbating, the more we're opening Pandora's box for trouble too. I had a mother, she was very uncomfortable with the idea of her son masturbating. Again, he was non-speaking, so there was an assumption that he couldn't be taught. She put a wrestling suit on him backwards with a belt on to try to prevent him from touching his penis. He became extremely aggressive at that point. Had not been aggressive all along. Puberty hit. He became very sexual naturally. Tried to keep him from expressing his sexuality. She was getting hurt. And I said, you have to be willing to trust this process and we work with him, or you're going to get really hurt. You're going to have to pick which direction you want to go. And she did, thank God.
Yeah, it is not simple. I did have another situation that I found interesting. I've only had this occur once, and you probably have dealt with it more than that. It was a gentleman who was absolutely delightful. He was in his 30s and he lived in a group home. He had a job in a supermarket stocking shelves, very personable guy. And he was on a medication for, I don't even remember what it was. And the medication was discontinued. So they put him on a new medication. But what happened? I mean, I found out about that after I found out the situation. He was fine at work. He had friends. And all of a sudden he started to get erections. Involuntary. They didn't know they were involuntary. And he would tap somebody on the shoulder and say, check this out. It felt good for him. And he would say, I'm happy. And he'd point to his erection. And he lost his job. He was restricted to being home. And they were very upset with him. But when we really dug into it, I said, something has changed here. This doesn't just happen like that. And we looked at his medications. And at the time we had a state, I think we probably still do, but there was a state pharmacist that you could consult with. And I did. I sent the list of medications. And there was a new medication. I think it was for sleep, to help him sleep. And it caused erections.
Oh.
It wasn't for erectile dysfunction. It was for something else. But the side effect was involuntary erections. And here was this poor guy who, was no fault of his own. But the pharmacist looked at it and said, oh, absolutely. It's this one. And I don't remember what it was, unfortunately, but that's exactly what the problem was. So they switched the medication again and it went away. And he had normal sexual function. I mean, he did masturbate, but this was way over the top. I mean, it was not constant, but pretty much. And I mean, he just had a terrible time, and he felt guilty and sad, and he was crying because he didn't mean it. But it did get resolved. But how many of those situations happened and they didn't get resolved?
Right. Yeah. And I don't know how much you work with teenagers, but I get a lot of referrals for teenagers who are dealing with spontaneous erections and just all of these changes also. And we have to come up with strategies to help with that too, because there isn't anything that just makes that go away. So I've worked with people on, you might get a spontaneous erection, or you might feel that you're becoming hypersexual at some point. What can you do? Physical movement is the best way. Try to cover yourself as much as you can. We've practiced carrying books in front of their private body parts. We've practiced carrying sweaters or sweatshirts so you can cover yourself, because kids are mortified when that happens. If it does happen and it's not due to, a medication or something like that, how do you get through so that you're not socially, interrogated or embarrassed by something that you can't control?
Yeah, and I think about, the staff who I like to give a scenario, 3 different situations, same scenario, 3 different staff people, a gentleman, so 2 people involved, a man who lives in a group home, and he happens to be, and one staff is there, and he's sitting watching TV, and the staff person's in the kitchen, but in the general area that the gentleman is. And he starts to masturbate in the living room. And one person might say, stop that, shame on. Another one might pretend they don't see it because, walk away and just let him be. But that's not okay either, because that's not a private space. And there's another person close by. And so that's not okay. And the third person might say, what you're doing is normal and healthy, but it's private. Why don't you just, go to your room and take a break? And that would, of course, be the best scenario. But it so much of it comes down to the people like us who are supporting folks with disabilities and how we approach this and our own baggage. And I mean, and if I think I've mentioned this before, if I learned anything from David Hinsberger, it's humor. And when I do training for agencies, I do a lot of things that are funny. It lightens it up. It makes it so much easier. And the ability to talk, like, how did you learn about sex? And someone's saying, wait till you get married, or what? I mean, all these, you don't do whatever they are. But there are other things too that people just don't know how to handle it. They can't talk to anybody about it. And when you have an open environment, like a group all together, 25 or 30 people together, you begin to kind of laugh about it. And then you say, oh yeah, I used to feel that way. Or, oh, that's what my mom told me. And then you get to a different place. You grow together. Just hearing words, like I will have sheets of paper around the room and write one word on each sheet of paper, and it might be orgasm or penis or masturbation or sex, whatever, and then ask people just to move around the room and write any other word they've ever heard that means the same thing. And then after we've done that for about 20 minutes, we will usually I will read the words, and boy, have I learned some words. I mean, things that you just can't even, it's just sort of boggles your mind, all the terms that there are for these, for many things, but in the world of sex, the words. And then you learn, but you laugh like, oh, that was a word, my mother would have grounded me if I said that word. Well, yeah, but if somebody says it to you or in your presence, you're not going to ground them. You're going to say, that's one word for that, and another one is, and give them the proper word. But the exercises for staff, just helping them get to a place where they realize how important they are in getting this information to the people that they care about. It's just important to get out of our comfort zones, really get out of our own way.
Well, hopefully we're helping people with that for sure. I
Yeah.
think another important thing, as I'm listening to you talk, is always ruling out medical issues too. So when you have an abrupt change with sexual behaviors, if you will, or sexuality, one of the things that I want to look at first is, are there possible medical issues happening? For example, I've had people who had hemorrhoids, or I've had people with UTIs, and all of a sudden they start inserting objects into their vaginal or rectal area. And again, that's not something that just happens. Medical is the easiest thing to rule out. So we want to take a look at, are they feeling some type of physical discomfort that could be lending them to do this? to their bodies too.
Yeah, well, that's such an important point. It really is. And, we'll never know how many people are unless we ask, we ask them or we see, as you said, a difference in behavior. And of course you would. I mean, they may be poking or kind of digging when they're sitting at the table, or they're mooching around in their chair. And that could very well be. And then they get into using objects that could hurt them. But that's a really good point to eliminate the medical absolutely first.
And you touched on the medication piece too. There is an assumption that a lot of people do know how to masturbate, or they are masturbating. Of course, we don't know unless we're seeing it, unless you are looking for physical evidence or hearing sounds or something like that. That could make you suspect that people are, but you don't know for certain unless you're having those conversations and talking with people. I've worked with a lot of people who they're able to masturbate, but they're not able to climax. And that sends their sexual motor running really, really, really high. And again, can spark some other issues without any real release. So looking at, as you've talked about, the medications that people are on too, the SSRIs, blood pressure medication can impact a person's ability to get erect, achieve climax, that sort of thing. And we do need to look at those things.
Yeah, we always look at it as like a behavioral thing. Well, we all don't, but it's easy to do that because that's what's on the surface. I did have I think about another person that did get a pretty bad infection, and it was the family she was in her 20s and a very healthy young woman, and she wanted a device, and her parents said absolutely she wanted a vibrator, and her parents said absolutely not, this is not anything that we're tolerating, and no, she can't do that. And so when they were out getting groceries, she bought an electric toothbrush, and it caused quite a bit of damage and got a pretty bad infection. And when we talked to them about that, it's sort of like what you said before. I know you're not comfortable with this, and I get that, but she's determined to do this, and it is a normal healthy thing, but I know you're not comfortable with it, but this is what she's just going to go further and further. So they finally said, yeah, all right, go get her a vibrator, whatever. But again, it was causing a medical problem. It seems like a simple thing, but it is not. It is not. And and one of the things I think that's important is to teach them how to take care of that toy and not to share it, because masturbation is safe. There's no risk of pregnancy. It releases endorphins, you can sleep better. And there's a lot of very positive things related to masturbation. But it's important for people to understand all of it and what it is and where you can do it and when you can do it. And where it's the private part for me is interesting, because you can of course you can say it's fine in your bedroom with the door closed, or it's fine in your bathroom with the door closed, but in a bathroom is not fine, because as we both know, McDonald's is not the place to masturbate, and people have been caught in these fast food bathrooms masturbating. So we have to be clear about that. And and then I think about when people they think they've fallen in love with a staff person, and again, I'm sure you've had a little bit of that, but it's normal. This is someone that cares about them, that is with them, and sees the best in them, and and it shouldn't be, no, that's inappropriate. It should be, well, thank you very much, that's a nice thing to say, but I have a husband, or I have a boyfriend, or whatever, but to just explain it to the person and not just say, no, that's not okay, because it's not okay, but why isn't it okay?
Yeah, the rule I have is I'm a paid staff. I'm paid to be in your life. Therefore, I can't be a natural or intimate person in your life. So the goal is to get you that person, friends or dates or a romantic partner. But because I am paid money to be in your life,
it's unfortunately so easy to take advantage. And when you look at 1 in 7% higher abuse rate, it's easy for some people to be taken advantage of. They want friends, they want a social life, they want a partner, and someone will simply say, I'll be your friend if you do this for me. And just all of that sexuality stuff, that's not specifically related to masturbation, but it's related to vulnerability. And we want to make people as strong and as self-sufficient in determining, what they do sexually and with whom and where, their decision and a decision that keeps them safe.
Mhm.
I wanted to talk a little bit about David Hinsberger's films. I find them absolutely fabulous, and many people are very uncomfortable with them. For anyone who doesn't know David Hinsberger, who recently passed away, he was Canadian and did his life's work working around dealing with sexuality and people with disabilities. And he produced two, I don't know if he produced them, but there were two films that he's done about masturbation. And one is called Fingertips, that's for women, and one is called Handmade Love for men. And they're real films with a real person and that actually masturbates. And they're done extremely well. The person begins saying they're in their own home. But the script is similar for the man and the woman. They're in a private home, and they repeat several times, if you're uncomfortable with this film, turn it off. So they want to be very careful that whoever's watching it is interested in it. And they begin by saying, I'm going to show you what an adult male or an adult female body looks like. And they take all their clothes off and identify their body parts. And then they say, now I'm going into a bedroom or wherever they go. Usually, I think it's a bedroom, and I'm going to masturbate. And they do that. And then they clean up and they get dressed and come back out to the camera obviously is with them. And they say, I hope this was helpful to you. Just have a happy life, whatever they say in the end. They're both pretty remarkable films. And I understand that people, they say, oh, it's pornography. It's not. It is. I mean, I would not consider it pornography. I would consider it they're educational tapes, and they're very, very helpful for anyone who is having any kind of difficulty with masturbation or just a lack of knowledge about it, general lack of knowledge. And I think it's helpful not only for people with disabilities, it's helpful for staff. And I think you can get them online. You would know that, I think.
Yeah, Diversity Press still sells them. I've been using them for years. We probably could benefit from an updated version. And people have asked me, Sean, don't you want to produce new masturbation? Nope, I am not interested in producing any of those things. But thank you.
They want you to become a star.
Well, that's not the type of star I've ever hoped to be. So
I know
that. They also, and the reason I like them, so they are very 80s sort of flicks. It feels like early 90s, but they produce good talking points too. They talk about privacy in the room, make sure your door is closed, make sure your blinds or your curtains are closed, because we've had people get in trouble for that sort of thing too. They've been masturbating in their bedroom, but someone could see through the window and then they were in trouble. The hygiene, that's a huge piece too. So working with people on the hygiene. Because the films are so old, I've had a lot of my female individuals talk about what I would call grooming or landscaping your private body parts too. and we've had to talk about that. I had one person say, Sean, it looked like she almost had an animal down there. So we've had to discuss, but these are good questions that we have to be willing and able to talk through and produce some answers to.
Yes, well, I'm going to have to practice that because, as you know, I'm now 80, and that boggles my mind that you could. Yeah, but I mean that is true. I mean times are changing, life is changing, and for better or for worse. But I think we're on the better part of it, and not the easy part for sure. But just working. I mean, I had one staff person tell me that she was so uncomfortable that she just couldn't work. She couldn't do anything around sexuality. She just couldn't talk about it. And it was her own history. She'd been abused and this all came out during a training. She'd been abused as a kid, and her mother found out and kind of blamed her. And it was horrible. It was just horrible. And hopefully she got some help with that herself, because carrying that around it's just so damaging, and it impacted her entire life. That is the work that we do with individuals with disabilities. And then the support that we give families and staff, support and training. When I say training, it never sounds really comfortable to me, because these are people who want as much information as they can get to do the best job they can. But, they're carrying around their own lack of training and with them. But I just, when I think about what I do with people with disabilities, I do the same thing with staff, but I present the information in a different way. It really helps.
Yeah, I mean, we're working with human beings, whether that's the individual that we're supporting or the supporters in their life. So we're seeing them as human beings, which means they're sexual beings. I met with someone yesterday who he masturbated in front of his supports coordinator. And as horrific as that is, I had to start with you're not in trouble. I'm not the police. I'm not turning you in for anything, but I have to help you so that we don't go down that road.
That's exactly true. And, and I think you mentioned earlier, issues that can happen if they're not dealt with, they can lead to, abusing someone who you could take advantage of. And I think about the two gentlemen I mentioned, and I think in the last episode that we did, both of whom were arrested for child pornography. And they did not understand that watching it, and they would masturbate while they were watching it, but they never touched a child, and they didn't understand why that was harmful until I explained to them that the more people watch, the more kids have to be recruited to do more films. But nobody ever talked to them about that. And why were they attracted to children in the first place, which might be a little bit of what you referred to earlier, just getting down to a younger group. And that's, there's so many things that happen because of something as simple as masturbation, simple and healthy and normal and private. It's one of the core things of who human beings are. And when you interrupt that, you get all kinds of different behaviors that are not healthy. And
when considering the kid issue, I don't feel like people who are looking at children, or maybe who even get aroused by children, are necessarily falling under the category of pedophilic disorder. I want to know more before slapping that on. What I've discovered, and I have supported plenty of people who do fall within the pedophilic disorder category, but what I've discovered over the years, kids are nicer. Kids are less judgmental. Kids are safer.
Well, that's certainly true, isn't it? Yeah.
So the people that we support are generally more accepted by kids. And a lot of people have a childlike enthusiasm about them themselves. That's not a bad thing. But they connect more with kids because, again, it's safer for them too.
Yeah. Well, you're right. That's absolutely true. Yeah, because don't go over there. There's a child over there, and that's not okay, because it's okay. You can't have someone not approach a child because you think they're going to do something wrong. But again, that's educating both sides of the coin there, and helping people to find the truth underneath it. And
what I can do and what I can't do as a 40-something-year-old person, adult, it's the same rule for people with disabilities.
And the sex toys that people are so uncomfortable with. I mean, it's just very sad to me that it's such a simple solution to some of these issues. And, just this is something that you can be private with and enjoy whatever, and tell them how to use it and how to keep it clean, and don't share it. That's the other thing. It's hard enough to get people to talk about masturbation and then talk about toys and then how to use them. I mean, it's all different levels of what we're doing and how we do it well. And again, getting out of our own comfort zone, because you have to with this stuff. You just have to.
And I pepper in things like pornography magazines and videos too, because people do need some sort of stimulation sometimes in order to get aroused and achieve what they need to achieve. And then people are just completely shutting down when I say, yeah, and we need to get him a DVD of pornography too, to kind of go along with that butt plug. You would think horns were growing out of my head at that point, but it's important stuff that we have to consider and work with. And my same rule applies as the sex toys with books or magazines or DVDs. They're private. They should only be viewed by you. They should be kept in your bedroom, that sort of thing. So it's okay. People learn it and they can follow it.
We're all human. We're all in this together. Talking about, what we're talking about, what is masturbation, and then that it begins, in infancy, and it's always there through our lives, and for better or worse, and it should be for better through our entire lives. And often it's not, and people get punished, people get hurt, people die, and we don't want we don't want to be part of any of that.
And sexual thoughts and feelings, they slow down at certain points in our life, and they can speed up at certain points of our life also. So,
Yeah.
and I've alluded in the past, it was hard for me to consider my grandparents being sexual beings, but I imagine that they were well into their latter years of life. The same is true for the people that we support. It doesn't matter the age. This is a natural human feeling that stays with you.
And it's healthy. I mean, the fact that it's healthy and it releases endorphins, it can lower headaches, it can help menstrual cramps. I mean, there are some very, very positive things about it. And they're tools that people can use. You sleep better. I mean, there are just so many positive things, but the negative ones always jump forward and, nobody's going to go blind. Nobody's going to break out in pimples, those things that they used to say when I was a kid. And well, they didn't say anything when I was a kid, but 20 years after that, that's what they were saying.
So the
I
moral of
don't think
this podcast is to masturbate to improve your overall physical health, mental health, and quality of life.
exactly. And love yourself. If you don't have a partner that you're with, and just love yourself. And I think that's really important. And have a big happy feeling all over.
And sadly, I think masturbation is a great way to figure out what you enjoy sexually. So if and when you do have a partner, you're able to advocate for yourself and openly talk about what you do like and what you're not comfortable with.
Yeah, it's just such an important thing. It's just so strange that it's gotten to be such a topic of like forbiddenness, but that's what we're doing here because it should not be that. It shouldn't be that.
And that's exactly what I was thinking. That's what we're doing. We're trying to take things that, people have worked so hard to amplify and give civil rights and liberties to groups of people. And we're starting to try and ban it. We're trying to erase it. And that's not okay.
It's not. And I think, we are going to do a program maybe on religion and culture. And that's so important because, religion and one's culture are such a, the part of the essence of who we are. And you want to be respectful. But you want to be respectful in all directions. And working with families, families love their individuals and they don't want them to get hurt. And so you have to be able to help them to understand all this and work their way through it and support them also. Primarily, like the young woman with the electric toothbrush, I mean, could have been much worse than it was. And her parents were very, very adamant that they didn't want her to do that. And they were not happy with me. But at the end, they were. At the end, they really were. And so that was good.
Please join our next episode as we talk about the LGBTQIA community and how to best support people through navigating gender identity and sexual identity.